Forecasts have worsened just months into President Trump's term, with growth predictions plummeting while recession fears now on the rise. A recent survey revealing a daunting 45% chance of recession within the next year, significant jump from 22% just in January. Economists attributing the downturn primarily to Trump's aggressive tariff policies, which have rattled both consumer as well as business confidence. For more, let's bring in Professor Tim Harcourt from UTS in Sydney, host of the Airport Economist channel here on Ticker as well. Do you think it's surprising that some are now anticipating a US recession?
No, it's not a surprise really, Aaron. I think it's almost the economic consequences of tariff instability is spooking markets and consumers as much as the actual impact of the tariffs themselves. We've seen a lot of tariffs on again, off again, constant changes out of the White House, constant adjustments with smartphones, as we saw the other day, and I think that uncertainty's rattled markets. And there's no worse thing for economic confidence than constant uncertainty in policy making.
It's often said that consumer sentiment is very different to what we see on the markets. But in this sense, there's some sort of suggestion that the markets are dropping and therefore we would lead to a recession. What are your views on that?
Yeah, the psychology of markets, you expect some animal spirits in day-to-day life in the markets, but this is quite different because it's sort of consistent across the board, and all the major forecasting houses are now factoring in a recession, and there's just constant policy flux out of the White House, particularly on tariffs.
Let's talk about China. We've seen the retaliation, obviously 125% as it currently stands. Do you see this tit for tat worsening, or do you think someone will capitulate here?
Look, I think in some ways, China started the trade war. We saw that on Australia with very high tariffs, particularly on wine and barley and wheat, in response to COVID-19 and calls for a COVID-19 inquiry. And of course, really, China's been involved in trade disputes since it joined the WTO. So in a way, it's Chinese retaliation to American tariffs, which was retaliation to the Chinese tariffs. So in some ways, this was an ongoing continuum of China's aggressive action on tariffs for, in Australia's case, non-economic reasons, because it was about COVID-19. It was more geopolitical than economic.
We've been talking about tariffs now for a few months, began with Canada and Mexico, then spreads to the rest of the world. Countries like Australia get caught up in the grip of it as well. This 90-day, standby, we don't know what's going to happen in 90 days' time. Do you think that it has helped? Certainly markets have been topsy-turvy roller coaster, but there are some who believe that the 90-day reprieve is just 90 days of uncertainty.
Yeah, I just think you change the timing of the impact, and you create more uncertainty in the process. The Hawke-Keating government had tariff schedules, as you remember, Aaron, that were basically locked in for 10 years. So people knew in the car industry and in textile, clothing and footwear the tariff schedule. And it was sort of locked in. Investors could make appropriate investments. People knew what was going to happen consumer-wise as well. This is very different to a moving feast, if you like, of tariffs being paused and then back on. Some countries getting a reprieve and then getting a double dose. So in some ways, I think this makes it worse than a longer, sort of more stable schedule.
I'm interested in your predictions for the Chinese economy. Obviously, they have had a really tough time, started by the property sector. Then there's the debt issue as well. It's also an issue for other countries in the region too. But will this sink China, or will China be able to essentially, are they now strong enough to be able to withstand whatever Trump throws at them?
Oh no, it won't sink China. It certainly won't help. China sort of went through this great transition from being a nation of shippers, predominantly export-led, to a nation of shoppers, looking at domestic consumption and investment and building those second and third tier cities we see in Western China, with Australian iron and steel, of course. And to some extent, they have moved towards a more domestic economy. The great shame for China is that the promised that joining the WTO and opening up the Chinese economy would allow it to liberalise its economy and also, some of its political structures. Well, that hasn't happened under Xi Jinping. If anything, the political structures have got more tight. There's social credit. There's more scrutiny of its citizens, despite the promise that a more open China economically would lead to more open China democratically in terms of politics.
And that certainly has not happened at this stage anyway.